I never imagined that a single piece of clothing could quietly dismantle the life I thought I understood. This isn't a fantasy or a joke I tell at parties. This is the truth I carried in silence for years, the truth that began on an ordinary day inside a hospital that smelled of antiseptic and exhaustion. I was there only because I needed the money. A temporary helper, filling in for short-handed staff. Nothing noble, nothing dramatic. Just clock in, do what I was told, clock out, disappear. I had no emotional connection to hospitals, uniforms, or care work. I was just passing through. That's what I believed. The corridor lights were harsh, almost judgmental, reflecting off white floors polished so much they looked fake. Nurses rushed past me, focused, tired, real. I felt like an intruder in their world, like someone who didn't belong there. Then a supervisor stopped me. "You can't enter the ward dressed like that," she said, glancing at my clothes. "Put on a uniform." I laughed, genuinely confused. "What uniform?" She didn't laugh back. She handed me a folded bundle from a locker. "Nurse uniform. We're out of other options." I looked down. White fabric. Simple. Clean. Light. For a moment I thought she was mistaken. For another moment, I almost refused. But there was urgency in her eyes, alarms echoing somewhere in the distance, and suddenly my comfort felt selfish. Just for today, I told myself. The changing room was small and quiet, like a confession booth. The door closed behind me with a soft click that felt louder than it should have. I stared at my reflection, still fully myself, still certain of who I was. I unfolded the outfit. The fabric surprised me. It wasn't stiff or cold like I expected. It was soft. Almost gentle. My hands lingered on it longer than necessary, and that should have been my first warning. As I changed, my heart beat faster, not from fear exactly, but from something I didn't have a name for. When I pulled the uniform over myself, it fit better than it had any right to. Too well. Like it had been waiting. I avoided the mirror at first. When I finally looked, I didn't recognize the person staring back. Not because I looked like someone else, but because I felt aligned. Centered. Calm in a way I had never experienced before. It scared me. I told myself it was just clothes. Just a role. Just a few hours. But when I stepped back into the corridor, something shifted. People didn't look at me the same way. They trusted me. They spoke softly. They needed me. And for the first time in my life, I felt needed in a way that wasn't forced. An elderly patient reached for my hand and whispered, "Thank you, nurse." That word hit me harder than I expected. Nurse. It echoed in my chest long after I walked away. With every step, the uniform felt less like a costume and more like a truth I had been running from. I started noticing things. How my posture changed. How my voice softened without effort. How caring didn't feel like an act, but like breathing. I kept telling myself this would end when the shift ended. I didn't know then that the shift had already begun inside me. And that once you feel like yourself for the first time, pretending becomes impossible. I thought the feeling would fade once the rush of the ward slowed down. I was wrong. Every hour inside that uniform pulled me deeper into something I didn't know I was missing. The hospital noises became background music, the beeping monitors, hurried footsteps, low voices exchanging instructions. Somewhere between carrying files and adjusting 4 stands, I stopped feeling like I was pretending. I remember passing a glass window and catching my reflection again. This time, I didn't look away. The uniform didn't erase me, it revealed something quieter, steadier. Someone I had kept buried under expectations I never questioned. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with recognition. It felt dangerous, like standing on the edge of a truth I wasn't ready to name. A senior nurse smiled at me and said, "You're doing well. First day nerves." I nodded, unable to explain that my nerves had nothing to do with the job. Inside, something was unfolding, something that didn't care about logic or labels. I was aware of my movements, how naturally they flowed, how caring gestures didn't feel learned. It was as if my body already knew this role long before my mind caught up. Then came the moment that cracked me open. A young patient, scared and shaking, refused to let anyone near her. Doctors tried, nurses tried, but she cried harder each time. Without thinking, I sat beside her and spoke softly. I didn't plan my words. They just came. Calm. Reassuring. Honest. She reached out and held my hand, gripping it like an anchor. "You make me feel safe," she said. Those words sank deep. Not because they praised me, but because they confirmed something I had never been allowed to feel. Safe. Useful. Real. When my shift finally ended, I stood alone in the changing room again, staring at the uniform I was about to remove. My hands hesitated. Taking it off felt heavier than putting it on. As the fabric slid away, it felt like shedding armor, like stepping back into a version of myself that suddenly felt incomplete. I went home that night unable to sleep. The mirror in my room reflected the same person I had always been, but I could feel the absence like an ache. I replayed every moment, every glance, every feeling. I tried to rationalize it. Stress. Adrenaline. A strange day. Anything but the truth. But the truth didn't ask for permission. The next morning, I woke up with the same thought echoing in my head. Nurse. Not the job. The feeling. The identity it unlocked. I started noticing things from my past that suddenly made sense. Moments I had dismissed. Feelings I had buried. Small choices that were never really random. I told myself I would forget it. I promised myself I wouldn't go back. Yet when my phone buzzed with another call from the hospital asking for help, my heart raced before my brain could answer. I said yes too quickly. Too eagerly. This time, when I put the uniform on, there was no shock. No confusion. Only a quiet acceptance. The mirror didn't scare me anymore. It felt honest. I didn't know how far this path would go. I didn't know what it would cost me. All I knew was that something inside me had finally woken up, and it wasn't willing to go back to sleep. And that scared me more than anything. By the third shift, the uniform no longer felt like borrowed fabric. It felt like permission. Permission to move differently, to speak gently without apology, to exist without constantly correcting myself. I stopped overthinking my hands, my walk, my tone. Everything settled into place so naturally that it terrified me. I started noticing how I was treated outside the ward too. Security nodded at me. Doctors included me in conversations. Patients looked relieved when I entered the room. No one questioned me. No one laughed. No one doubted. The world accepted me faster than I had ever accepted myself. That should have made things easier. Instead, it made everything heavier. Because every time my shift ended, I had to return to a version of myself that now felt like a costume. My regular clothes felt stiff, unfamiliar, like they belonged to someone else. I caught myself standing differently, speaking differently, even thinking differently, and then stopping abruptly, afraid someone would notice. At home, the silence became unbearable. I would sit on my bed replaying the day, not the work, but the feeling. The way my chest felt calm. The way my mind didn't fight itself. I realized how loud my life had always been inside, and how quiet it became in that uniform. I tried to talk myself out of it. I told myself this was temporary, a side effect of stress, of environment, of attention. But late at night, alone with my thoughts, I couldn't lie anymore. This wasn't about a job. It was about identity knocking so hard it refused to be ignored. The breaking point came when someone from my past recognized me at the hospital. An old acquaintance. They looked at me twice, confused, then smiled awkwardly. "I almost didn't recognize you," they said. "You seem different. Happier." Happier. That word landed painfully true. I laughed it off, but inside, panic rose. If others could see it, how long before the world demanded answers I wasn't ready to give? That night, I stood in front of the mirror longer than ever before. No uniform. Just me. And for the first time, I felt grief for the person I was pretending to be. I whispered questions I had never allowed myself to ask. Who am I when no one is watching? Who am I when I stop resisting? Tears came without drama. Quiet. Heavy. Honest. I realized something then that changed everything. The uniform didn't change me. It removed the fear that kept me hidden. It gave me a glimpse of a life where I wasn't constantly at war with myself. The next day, when I put the uniform on again, I didn't feel excitement. I felt resolve. Whatever this was, I couldn't keep living half alive. I didn't know what acceptance would cost me. Friends, family, safety, certainty. But I knew denial would cost me more. As I walked into the ward, I felt something solid form inside me. Not confidence. Courage. Because once you meet your true self, even briefly, the lie becomes unbearable. And I knew, deep down, there was no going back to who I was before. The day everything changed wasn't dramatic from the outside. No alarms, no confrontations, no big announcement. It was quiet. Almost gentle. And somehow, that made it heavier. I was assigned to a long-term patient that morning, someone who had been in the ward for weeks. They watched people carefully, the way you do when you've had time to observe without distractions. As I adjusted their chart, they looked at me and said, "You're very present. Most people rush. You don't." I froze for a second. Not because I was afraid, but because they saw something real. I smiled, thanked them, and continued my work, but inside, something settled. A deep, steady certainty. I wasn't pretending anymore. I was choosing. Later that day, I was asked a simple question by a colleague while we folded clean uniforms. Have you ever thought about staying? Training properly? It felt like the world paused. I didn't answer right away. My mind flashed through everything I could lose. The explanations. The raised eyebrows. The silence from people who wouldn't understand. The version of myself I'd carefully constructed to survive. Then I thought about what I'd already lost by hiding. I answered honestly, yes, I have. Walking home after that shift, I didn't change immediately. I sat alone in the locker room, uniform still on, hands resting in my lap. I realized I wasn't waiting for permission anymore. I was waiting for acceptance from myself. And I finally had it. The fear didn't disappear. It still hasn't. But it changed shape. It stopped being a wall and became a door. Something I could walk through instead of something that trapped me. Over time, I made choices slowly. Carefully. I didn't announce anything. I didn't rush. I allowed myself space to grow into the truth I had touched. Some people drifted away. Some surprised me with kindness. Some never noticed at all. What mattered was this. For the first time in my life, I felt whole. The nurse outfit didn't make me someone else. It gave me the courage to stop hiding who I already was. It taught me that care isn't weakness, that softness can be strength, and that living honestly is the bravest thing I've ever done. Even now, when I think back to that first day, that folded uniform in my hands, I feel grateful. Because that moment didn't just change my job. It changed my relationship with myself. And once that changes, nothing is ever the same again.